Let me start. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to Docaviv 2021 at the Cinematheque around Tel Aviv and online, where we are today. My name is Neta Alexander. I'm an assistant professor of film and media at Colgate University, New York. So I'm actually in upstate New York right now, recovering from a cold. So I apologize for my voice. I am delighted and excited to be moderating this masterclass with producers Sebastian Pardo and Riel Roch Decter, a collaboration between Docaviv and the Israeli documentary Filmmakers Forum. So Sebastian and Riel are the co-founders of Memory, an independent artist-driven studio specializing in producing and curating thought-provoking films that push the formal boundaries of the medium, and hopefully we'll hear more today about exactly how they do that. In 2016, Memory was named one of Filmmaker magazine 25 New Faces of Independent Film. In 2020, Memory was awarded the Silrich Producing Award for their work in shaping new ways of filmmaking. They are the producer of several of Theo Anthony's films that have screened at Docaviv, including Red Film, Subject to Review, and this year, All Light Everywhere, which is currently screening in the Depth of Field competition. And I highly recommend catching it if you haven't already done so. So this masterclass will last 1 hour. You are very welcome to leave your question in the Q&A feature on Zoom, as well as comments on Facebook, and we'll try to take as many audience questions as possible and answer them. And with that, I'm going to start us off with my first question that has to do with the short description of your studio that I just read, because you call Memory an independent artist-driven studio, which caught my attention the first time I read it, because normally we tend to say production studio, right, or like a filmmaker-driven studio. And I wonder what makes the film that you're producing stand apart as works of art? How do you think of filmmakers as artists?
Yeah, I'm like smiling inside that you caught that, because we put so much thought into that, because I think you're coming to it from asking about like what makes it art. And I think for us, it was so much about like, how can we support artists who work in moving pictures in ways that allow them to uniquely express how they see the world. And that doesn't always fit into a 90-minute, 2-hour film where everyone's looking at the screen in a theater in the same direction. So we didn't want to limit ourselves to that. And we want to encourage thinking about things in a broader scope than just kind of a film widget that kind of matriculates its way through the traditional film landscape by going to festivals and releasing in these different windows, and then, you know, eventually being available to buy online. We want to, by setting a brief that's slightly different, it encourages artists to think about their work slightly differently and think about us as a home for that. So I think we were very intentional in changing it and not limiting ourselves to film production company. And I think also putting the word studio in there was important to us, just because we do try to think of the whole film as a work, including how it's released, its marketing, its trailer, its poster, its how it's funded. Everything is part of the artistic statement, and we're there to help support that, collaborate in a very deep level with that throughout the whole process. So it is more of like how a studio works, where it's more vertically integrated. So yeah.
So let me ask, I always like to start conversation with a somewhat provocative question. So let me ask one. Would you describe yourselves or the filmmakers that you tend to work with as anti-storytellers? Do you have some grudge against story? And when I say story, I mean the more traditional, conventional Netflix documentary way of thinking about story as a character development with following a subject that have a conflict or a dilemma that needs to be solved within 90 minutes.
I will say from very early on in my life, I always loved the first act of movies. I found the way of using movies to establish a world, a character, like those are always the most interesting to me. And I don't know if subconsciously that creeped into like how we approach films, but I don't think we explicitly are anti-story. I think we just gravitated to the projects that felt like they were trying something new and different. And oftentimes those are things that are maybe less story driven. I don't know, Riel, do you have a take?
Yeah, I don't, that's a really great question, because I think, oh, am I on mute? Am I good?
No,
you're good.
Because, story, there's story in the traditional sense. Yeah, 3-act structure, or, the hero's journey and all the things that people talk about in Hollywood about applying different stories or traditional story structures. People have written books about, like, there's 8 different stories and that's it. Obviously, you looked at like Greek mythology and all these different stories, but I think that the dance or the excitement about helping these artists make these films or do these works of art is, well, what is the story that they're trying to get across? And yeah, maybe it's not the way that we're used to taking in a story, but it's still a story. It's still information delivery. It's still helping audience or getting an audience to think critically about something or question things. I think getting people to question their preconceived notions is the goal most of the time. I think for me personally, and for the artists. So it's not anti-story. We're certainly not trying to go out of our way to destroy story or say that story is not important. I don't, I think we don't want to make films that are, or we don't encourage making films that are so experimental that the audience is just left confused the entire time, or is left to not understand, or felt abused. There's some films that are endurance films that like intentionally are trying to like, provoke the audience in ways that are like negative. I don't think we are anti-story. I certainly don't think of ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's more of a anti-convention, and there's so many conventions when you're dealing with story. Right. I think a lot of it grows out of that. And I think like in a lot of ways, for me, like there was something inauthentic in a lot of ways to say that like, oh, change is easy and it happens in 90 minutes or whatever. Like change is like a lifelong process in a lot of ways. And I always liked reflecting that in my works. But yeah, I don't think we're like I think Riel said it, like we're not explicitly anti-story.
And I think too, in documentary specifically, when you're dealing with real people, there's a tendency, especially in conventional documentary, to apply these conventional story structures to real people, and that is really reductive a lot of the time.
Yeah, their life's not done.
Yeah, and it kind of enhances the already extractive nature of documentary filmmaking to impose your conventional 3-story structure to someone's real life in order to pull off your film in a what you think is the traditional filmmaking. So yeah, definitely not anti-story. I think constantly thinking about story and thinking about its implications and trying to put film or engage audiences in experience that has them question what is a story or what's not a story,
And I think this is something that all of the really brilliant films in the depth of field competition in the festival are very committed to doing. And hopefully we'll have time to circle back to this question of storytelling when we're talking about specific films. But I also want to take a step back for a second, just to give the audience some context or some sense of your collaboration. So what made you, it's 2014, right? And you look around you and you're like, okay, we need to have our own studio, right? We can bring something to this industry that no one else can bring. Mm-hmm. So when did you start this collaboration, and why did you think that this was the solution to have your own studio?
Yeah. I guess there's like a medium version and a very short version. But in short, we I guess I'll do the medium version. So I went to, I was working at a film production music video commercial company called the Directors Bureau that was founded by Roman Coppola and Mike Mills. And super interesting place that attracted a lot of great talent. And I naturally grew into a role of a producer for Gia Coppola. And from there, produced a film called Palo Alto. And Riel was, Mike Mills is a co-founder of the Directors Bureau, and he was working at the company The Beginners, and he had produced some films of his own. And we kind of found ourselves outgrowing our environs a little bit and noticing that something was kind of terribly wrong with the film industry, that, I could work on a movie for 4 years and get paid less than the person who designed the poster, that everything was kind of out of whack, and that these films weren't able to recoup their investment in a way that either made sense for the financier or allowed the storytelling to be unchained. Everything was kind of fitting to the market. And we kind of had the hypothesis of like, well, we're surrounded by all this great talent, and we know how to produce, and we have credits to our name. Really, what we should be doing is building more of a brand that means something to a very specific audience, and make films for that audience. And that we knew we didn't have the capital to do it at kind of a scale that would, make that bet kind of overnight. But we thought that our first mover's advantage would be enough to kind of get a certain amount of energy and give us the freedom to make films that maybe normally wouldn't be financially successful, especially if we could control the whole widget and we could design everything in-house and keep costs down. I do a lot of design work. And so the branding for the company and, posters and trailers and all, and Riel has an editing background. So that kind of combined to allow us to do, like I was saying about our studio, that we could do a lot of the things ourselves. And therefore that opened up new projects that were maybe seemingly nobody else could touch because they were not as commercial. And it was a hypothesis that we had to kind of figure our way through. And we eventually found that the energy of what was most vital in the industry, we found was happening mostly in nonfiction. That how could you create, like you would never go to a gallery in 2020 and not expect to see work that implicated its own creation, that wasn't self-reflexive. And so we just found that kind of energy was existing in nonfiction. And over time, our work kind of moved more into that corner. And that's where we found a lot of reward. But it wasn't necessarily something where we hit the ground running with it takes time to kind of figure out exactly where you want to go. But Riel, do you want to talk about the short film program maybe?
And I want to actually just to be more clear about the business model, right, of the studio, because you're telling us this was non-commercial films, right? So you probably are not going to make profit by theatrical distribution, ticket selling, and so on. So how can this film make profit, or at the very least, how can they not bleed money?
Yeah, I think the idea initially was that we could enter into waters nobody else could, because we could keep costs down by virtue of controlling the whole widget. Ultimately, the industry is in a place where it's very, very difficult, if not nearly impossible, for films to make money at any scale, unless you're making something where you have a celebrity talent that's worth more than what you made it for. But that limits you to a very, very narrow range of films, and you can't make enough of them in a year to make it worth its while, really. I think for us, we've been lucky enough to make things cheaply enough that we can more or less break even and use enough of the financing from these films to pay us a little bit to work on them. I mean, we can get deeper into the business model as how it works now. I don't know if now's the time you want to go into it or later. You tell me, but
just to add on, I think having worked in the industry for a few years before we started the company, worked mostly in independent feature films, saw how that industry works, the casting and the working with the agencies and going out to make these films and taking them to festivals and hoping somebody buys them. And, you know, realizing that there's a whole group of artists and interesting filmmakers, like needing for us to find them and create a home for them, but one that had kind of a name, like to the branding. We wanted to build something that was bigger than just the two of us. You know, you see a lot of production companies that are simply like, you know, Two Guys LLC or whatever, and you're like, okay, that's just a name you slap on something after you finish it. And for us, we wanted to create something that was bigger than us, that we could bring other people into, and that the brand would signal, and live beyond us, would signal the kind of work that it is, and that this is something interesting. Because, you know, similarly to a record label, let's say a small record label breaking new artists, like you're not familiar with the artist, you know, the film doesn't have a big talent in it or a big actor in it, but it's interesting because it's coming out of this place and this group of people, you know. And a lot of the artists that we work with,
influence,
all the artists we work with, like, you know, they are being influenced by each other and helping each other, and so it's I mean, that's where we've landed now. I think in the beginning, we were looking around, we were kind of planting our flag, and one of the ways we did that was through like a shorts film program that we did, because knowing that films take years and years, especially the way that we went about doing them, which was to do a lot of the work ourselves, because we didn't have a lot of money, so we do all the parts instead of hiring all the parts out. So we curated a bunch of films and filmmakers we were working with, filmmakers that we admired, into a program that we then screened all across North America. It kind of eventized these screenings, you know, designed flyers and trailers and promoted them and got people out as a way to start building our brand, but also as a way to find our community and showcase, like, these are artists we like. Do you like them too? Do you make things like this as well? Like, can we, you know, so in a really like simple way, just, this is what we're about. And that led to all of the things that we're working on now. It's all kind of a chain, you know, like none of the artists that we work with came to us from an agency, or, you know, it's like someone came to our program, loved something, introduced us to someone, they have a project, we check it out, you know. It all kind of stemmed from that, those early efforts.
Yeah. And those programs, you know, it was really rewarding to see what happened to the careers of the people we programmed. I mean, they weren't necessarily people that we always produced for, but we ended up working with some of them, you know, in other ways, and just seeing them go on to do really great work is super rewarding. And curation remains a big part of what we do. We curate on our website. We have like a live streaming part of our website where we'll put on, you know, movies of ours, other people's movies, short film programs, short film series. And so being able to capture, again, a lot of it is talking about like energy and things that are happening outside of the mainstream. If we can continue to like share these things that we think are valuable and important and put them in a context that elevates them above the kind of din of everything else, that seems like a good thing, like a good thing for the landscape of film, to show people things that might inspire them to think about film in a way that is maybe more approachable. Or they said, oh, I didn't realize I could make something so kind of humbly be so impactful. And I think that's a big thing that excites us, is a little bit of the outsider energy, you know, that we all have these super phones and super cameras in our phones, and we have all this kind of things, but we're still thinking, oh, well, I don't have the resources to make a movie. And it's like, well, you do. It's about the ideas. And I think the fine art landscape is very comfortable with that idea, but we're still very much in the like 1903, you know, range of paintings where it's like, oh, this is just, you know, you go from Courbet in 1870 doing like loose brushwork impressionist stuff to completely abstract stuff in 40 years. And, you know, that was all by virtue of kind of technological breakthroughs and breaking down of kind of needing a lot of infrastructure to afford paints and canvases and a studio and things like that. And I think we're in that moment with film in a lot of ways, but we're still waiting around for permission to make a film in the kind of classic way. And so when people kind of unshackle themselves from that mind prison a little bit and really just make things earnestly because they're curious, or because they want to try something out, or because they want to reflect their experience, we love kind of trying to elevate those things to be seen as serious works that are valuable. And so there's so much that's happening online that does not ever touch a festival or does not ever touch the mainstream, but is still insanely innovative, personal, expressive. And so we love giving voice to those type of projects.
So I'm thinking building on that, and also this masterclass is part of an entire day on documentary production. So I want to ask you a bit about pitching, because there was a story you told in a previous Q&A that really caught my ear, that has to do with one of your first meetings with Theo Anthony, when he came to you and he pitched 2 different projects and say, I've been following this teenage bodybuilder for many, many years. I can make a documentary about teenage bodybuilding. That's one topic. And then I'm really curious about rats. And I don't know what I want to do with it, but like rats seem to be, a thread or a common topic in so much of my footage. And I remember, if I'm not mistaken, you told him, oh yeah, we want the rat film. Yeah. And if you can walk us through the thought process, because sure. any Netflix executive or anyone else probably will say, oh, bodybuilding, sure, yeah, show me that footage. Like I don't want to, yeah. I don't know, watch a film about rats, but so what makes a good pitch and what makes you excited about the project?
I think that gives us slightly too much credit. We definitely looked at the bodybuilder footage as well.
Yeah, we worked on that too.
But we were definitely more interested in the rat one. I think he was able to articulate enough of how, it wasn't a perfect pitch. And I actually really appreciate that. If it's a little too slick, then it's maybe too pre-chewed and too well suited for somebody else. I think the rat pitch, he was saying enough of interesting words and evoking enough kind of interesting connections. And then once we saw the footage, we were convinced. And I think that he thought it was a short. And I think that was another thing, that he wasn't holding himself to like what an official film might be. And so he was a lot freer with what he was doing in his rat film at the time. And even though he thought it was a short, it was much longer than it ended up being. But I just think what he was doing formally, I think the first time we saw it, I said, oh, this is like watching the internet with a lot of tabs open, and you have your Google Maps and you have Wikipedia and you have some archival you discovered. And we had just never seen anything like that. And I think that's the thing that we're always, we put our finger on and go, wow, I've never seen anything like that. And that's hard to define, it's like, when you see it, which isn't a great way to go out into the world and say, send us your stuff. But that's kind of the thing.
Yeah. And I remember his pitch, and other pitches. Usually if the pitch starts with, it's kind of hard to explain, but that's usually a good entry point for us, because they will explain it. They just don't have their pitch down. Again, like if the pitch is too slick, then it's like, okay. But if they're like, I don't know how to explain this, but it's about
rats,
the
ideas.
But it's,
yeah,
these are the ideas. It's about rats, but it's not about rats. It's about this, but the rats are my way in to talk about these things. But and then they go on and on and on. And then they're like, but I don't know. And you're like, let's see it, And I think, and I distinctly remember a conversation with Rat Film after we had, I think, watched it the first time, was, look, there's a lot of things in this that, like, if we weren't us, we would tell you to cut out of this film, right? Like there's a film in here that is much different than we're going to tell you what to do with. And if you want that, we're not the guys. But there's things in here like, you don't touch any of this stuff, even if it seems like off or you're not sure about it. Like leave it in. Mm-hmm. But he have shown to other people that have been like, oh, take all this stuff out. It's confusing. It doesn't make any sense.
That being said, we told him to take out a lot of things that didn't make sense.
Yeah. True.
It was just a process of like testing his ideas, and could he justify their inclusion, and did they hang on the same skeleton? And so it was like this kind of like consistent back and forth with us, getting the cut down and just like really honing in on what rap film became. And I also think that it's notable that like we met him in Rotterdam because we were there with another movie, and that was part of like the magnet that attracted him to us. So again, it didn't come through an agent or a manager or anything like that. It was like a very organic mutual attraction.
And I think I was planning to screen a clip from that film, but actually I think I'm not going to do it just because I do have a lot of questions, and I see that the time is just flying. But I will say that the expert from the film that I was planning to show has a very disturbing, it's very uncomfortable image in which we see a snake about to eat a pinky, a baby rat. And then at the very end of the film, and this is not a spoiler because I don't think, I mean, one of the beautiful, brilliant thing about all of the films you're producing is that they are spoiler immune. Like you cannot have spoilers to any memory film. I think that's my opinion. But anyhow, to the end of the film, we see the snake actually eating the baby rat, and that could be a very, very it made me feel nauseated, right? There was a very corporal reaction to that image. I did not want to watch it, and mostly I wanted Theo Anthony to cut away from it, right? I was like, okay, I get it, it's gonna kill it. Right. I get it, it's dying. I get right. Just can we watch something else, please? And I guess the question is, how comfortable are you with making viewers uncomfortable?
Well, if it grows out of an artistic statement that I think the film justifies, then I would almost feel like censorship at that point. Like I want the statement to be as unfiltered as possible. You know, it's already so constrained by things like budget and time and, you know, whatever, that to have it and not use it breaks the artistic ethos in a way. I don't want to create things just to make you have that feeling, but that whole film builds up to like, you can't look away. Like you are complicit in like you have to face this and it's going to be uncomfortable, but this is what's happening kind of thing. And that uncomfortability is part of the text of the film in a way that if you remove it, I think dramatically alters the film. Yeah.
If you remove it, and we again had long discussions about that specific scene. It is the end of the film. Like, is this really how you want to end your film? Like, why are we ending it in this way? Like having those conversations. And, you know, prior to that scene is a very like beautiful moment that creates like a fake catharsis about Baltimore. A new Baltimore arises and the future is bright and everything will be solved, right? And you know, we all know that's not true in watching it, but it does all the things that, you know, a typical documentary does, which kind of at the end of showing you all these disturbing things makes you kind of warm and fuzzy at the end. Make sure you walk out of the theater feeling okay about your experience, and that, you know what, if I, you know, donate some money, like maybe this problem will be solved. Or if I tell a friend at a dinner party, yeah, if I hashtag this problem, you know, I did something. And there was a version where we kind of created a false version of that, but to go to such a disturbing image immediately after is to say, no, that's not true. and you need to really think about everything you just watched, and none of these problems are solved, and they still exist, and you need to kind of sit in that, again, up for interpretation, but these are the discussions we're having around why to show that. Not like, let's really get them at the end and like really mess with them, you know. It's all in keeping with the bigger ideas, you know. So
it's not Jackass.
Yeah. Although someone could view it that way, you know. Like I remember being a teenager and a friend had a snake and I filmed it and I was like, wow, this is cool. That's not what we're doing in that moment, you know. But yeah.
And if Theo couldn't articulate it, I think we would have had a much easier time. Articulate isn't fair. By articulate, I mean not only with his words, but like make it work in front of us with the video, music, right, with cinema. If it couldn't be justified, then we would push very hard to, you know, to take it out. at the end of the day, we trust our artists and we would let it. But I think usually our artists trust us as well. And so there's a great mechanism there to kind of like, yeah, make it work.
And just to, not to belabor this, but it's, you know, it's the disturbing imagery that you could find in our films, especially like All Light Everywhere. Like the things that are disturbing aren't mostly images of violence. You know, all the violence, or what we typically view as violence, you know, what we've seen in a lot of body cam footage, or, you know, a citizen filming of police. Those images can be violent and disturbing. I think the real violence is everything that leads up to those images. And that's, you know, what that film, All Light Everywhere is really exploring. So yeah, there's a lot of disturbing, violent images in some of our films, but we're not going for the easy moment of violence. I think the more complicated is how those things end up happening and what happened to lead up to that. So
and I think I want to use that chance to talk a bit more about All Light Everywhere. By watching the film, I came out with the impression that this must be a project that, you know, started as one thing and ended up being quite a different thing, just based on what Theo Anthony is telling us to the end of the film, that this was supposed to be some collaboration between him and students in Baltimore, right, making their own films, right, which ended up, that footage ended up not being in the film almost at all. So as producers, like, what do you do with a project like that constantly change, and how do you make sure that this is actually changing in the right direction?
Yeah, go ahead, Riel.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I don't think the project necessarily changed very much. I think the way that we approached the project, you know, the way that Sebastian mentioned, like watching Rat Film felt like a bunch of tabs open on a computer and you're just kind of toggling through them. The pitch for All Light Everywhere was literally like, the deck for it is a bunch of tabs of different ideas that Theo wanted to touch upon through the film. Obviously, we had no idea how those ideas are going, not the ideas, but like how those different areas of exploration were going to come together in the actual film. But the way that we went about producing it is very modular. So every module we would plan very carefully and go out and shoot. And then that one would be in the can, and then we would move on to the next module. And the high school segment, like spending the time with the arts program in Baltimore, you know, that was a module, and that was one of the really intense modules. Like the shooting with Exxon, I think that was 2 shoots over like 2 or 3 days tops, you know, that we shot in like 2017, like 2018. The arts program in Baltimore, Theo and Jana, the other producer, were in there they spent months trying to find the right program, the right class. And then, spent weeks and weeks with the kids. And actually the whole thing culminated, we spent a week with the kids. I went down there, taught like a little producing class. We had a cinematography class. We did all these workshops, and then it all built up to us helping them produce a music video, or like a further program. So we spent a lot of time with them. And of course we thought that was going to be one of the modules of the film. And for a long time it was, and the decision not to put it in was one that came very late. And I think in that way was the big change in everything. But the film and the ideas of the film didn't change very much from the onset. Obviously, a lot happened in the world in the 4 years that we made it that informed certain things. I don't think it changed that much. I know that sounds wild to say, but
I was going to say the same thing, that like, actually, I don't think it actually did change that much. It changed maybe like what mechanisms might express the conceits of the film, but the conceit remained the same. But I think in general, our movies, like just one step back, like it's always a process of discovery. And I think that's true for any film. There's the film you write, the film you shoot, and the film you edit. And I think that's true for documentary more so. And these films take years often because of, in a way, we build the playground to allow that, so that we can kind of optimize for the best version. Like maybe this is where the lack of story question comes from, is that like, if we had the story structure very tightly, we could probably make films a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. But what we do instead is we, in the time, like if you're familiar with time, money, quality, like you can only have so much time, money, or quality. The more time, you know, the more time that you want, you usually need more money, or whatever. They're all connected. The more one you have, the less of the other two you have. So we always optimize kind of for time to allow the ideas to kind of live in their best combination as best we can. Obviously, there's finite everything, yeah. But the ideas, we try to hold the filmmakers and the films true to evolving into the kind of most truthful, and truthful is a tricky word, but like honest and interesting version of themselves as possible.
And I think it's very much, it's an essay film, and it's very much a film about the Eden industrial infrastructure of police brutality and surveillance, and all those different ways of seeing that, also connected to Anthony's short film subject to review that looks at similar topics. But one of the most amazing aspects of All Light Everywhere is really, I mean, that you were all able to get the excellent CEO to collaborate with that idea and to show you around his kingdom and so on. And I'm wondering about this process. Like, did he watch the film? Is he about to take legal actions against you? Was he happy with it? I mean, it's just how did it work? What kind of consent form this man had to sign before Theo was able to make use of this footage?
It's funny, this question keeps coming up. You know, the access is totally based on Theo's, you know, tenacity. He, you know, early on reached out to Axon, and, you know, and surprising when you kind of say it, but like everything that he says is what he wanted to say. There's no got you in any of it. There's no, oh, but what about all of this? Like Theo doesn't ask him any questions that are not within the range of the things he wants to talk about. He's a marketing, you know, PR voice for Axon. And, you know, Theo and the cinematographer, they spent a lot of time like analyzing all of his previous, you know, interviews on news and other tours he's given. And basically pitched him, Axon, Steve, on, hey, can you give us the grand tour and show us all these things you've already shown other people and say all these things you've already said? Can you do that for us? And he's like, of course. And so, you know, as you see, like in the film, we set up that it is him being like performing for us to do this. And so, you know, as far as the question, like, has he seen the film? I have no idea. I would assume so. You know, he has Google Alerts set up. I'm sure it's come up a lot. I don't know, honestly, if he watched that film and felt like it was saying anything that wasn't true. I mean, he believes the things that he's saying. I mean, they believe, you know, in their mission as a company to protect people and help police be effective police officers and save lives with tasers and body cameras. You know, they believe these things, and the film showcases those things. So yeah, it's hard to know, but they have not, yeah, from a producerial standpoint, they have not come to us with any legal issues. I think they'd be, I mean, it's in their interest not to, I think, because if they did, it would give attention to the film and then an attention to the issues that the film is bringing up, and be worse off. It's better for them just to just ignore it, I think.
And maybe just to slightly push back against that, or just to complicate that, and also return to the question of story. I mean, the story is in the editing. The story is in the juxtaposition of those different models and the different narratives. And I think I would imagine this man was probably not stupid. That's my impression of him. Understand very well that once you juxtapose his marketing material with someone who's trying to take a photo of Baltimore every 2 seconds, and the local community is fighting against this person, and with other thing going on in the film, that might not make the impression that he was open to make when you welcome this filmmaker into the factory and into some trade secrets and so on. But I might be wrong, of course.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's. I think anyone working documentary can ask themselves that question, like, why is this subject allowing us to do this, right? Is it their ignorance about how film is made and the risk they're putting themselves in through even just those juxtapositions, I think Theo managed to, he used his real name. They clearly could look up his previous work. We weren't hiding in any way about who we were and what we were doing. I think Theo just physically can traffic in that world in a way that his privilege allows him to be able to traffic in that way, where they see him as maybe one of their own. I don't quite know what the dynamics are, but he's obviously can enter that space without arousing too much suspicion. Goes in with a kind of police-like buzz cut and is like, I just want to see your cool tools, and we walk in with a giant like Steadicam kind of like rig, and they're like, oh, you have tools too, like there's like a kind of a
boys with their toys mentality.
Yeah, boys with their toys. So and the last thing I'd say is like there is they want to be transparent, right? Like transparency, candor. I mean, he even talks about it, like they want to seem transparent. I mean, so much of body cameras and the work that they're doing is in the name of this word transparency that, we should, question a lot. But they let us in at that point. I mean, and there was already a whole documentary made about tasers and about the company like several years ago. So they're not stupid, as you said, like, so yeah, I mean, they could have easily said no, but they didn't. And, here we are.
Yeah, Sebastian, I thought, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's it. The only thing I was going to add is like, I think it definitely did shape our approach in terms of like keeping the materials close to the vest and waiting until the movie was done and out before any kind of image of our footage of Axon or any kind of hint of our, I mean, that was the only way that I think it really, we maybe behaved a little bit differently, just to like, in an abundance of caution, like make sure that the movie could exist first. And then if anything were to happen in regards to them being unhappy, it'd be, in the situation that they are now, where it'd be bringing more attention to a film that already exists rather than preventing a film from existing. But that's it.
And I think I just want to remind everyone who might be watching, whether it's on Zoom or Facebook, if you have questions, please send them to us. We are shockingly running out of time, but if you have questions, we can probably still squeeze one or two. And to build on that discussion, for me it was very interesting because I just happened to watch All Right Everywhere kind of back to back with a very, very different memory film called Cranston that was directed by Mary Ellen Ersler. I hope I pronounced her name right. And what was interesting about that experience, watching the two films back to back, is that at the very beginning of Cranston, she described the film as a love letter to her high school friends. And I'm wondering, as producers, and maybe we can even give more practical advice, right, to aspiring filmmakers or to filmmakers. What do you feel is more challenging, to make a film about someone that you're incredibly ambivalent and critical of, or to make a film about your best friends?
I would say friends.
Yeah,
I think there was
friends.
more considerations. Yeah, there was more considerations about, you're extra aware that not only are they real people, but you have real relationships with them, and you're not free to do whatever you want. And so I think, I mean, you are obviously, but I think that there was more of an ethical responsibility. I mean, we always try to have an ethical relationship with our subjects. It's important to us. But I think when they're your friends, there's extra kind of like dynamics that impinge on the filmmaking process and maybe make things a little trickier, certainly trickier for release and things like that, because you can't, you know, if you have a Harmony Korine movie, it's very easy to put James Franco on the poster acting like, you know, a crazy, you know, person. But that becomes a little uglier if it's a real person who's a friend of yours, and you don't want to feel like you're exploiting some sort of gonzo element of them. And so it is, that film specifically, there was this kind of give and take where they were performing a bit, but it's also an element of who they really are, right? So there was always this fine line of like, well, how far can we really push it? And what's kind of the responsible way to reflect how they live.
And I just wanted to say, for those who never heard about the film, it's a documentary about a group of men who moved to an isolated place in the Arizona desert to create kind of a self-sustained community, mostly smoking weed, growing weed and smoking weed and making music. And they're all in their early 20s. Right? So they're also, it's not just shooting some of your best friends, but it's also documenting your friends doing some illegal things, or just kind of being on a soul searching journey while being stoned most of the time. And if you want to say more about helping Manny to negotiate that.
And there was the element of like asking them to participate in the film's creation in a kind of fictional way too. And so it's not just a documentary. There's also a collaboration that is a little unusual for a straight doc.
Yeah, and you know, to kind of add on to the sort of synopsis, I mean, they are part, and I don't know how big this is in other parts of the world, but like SoundCloud is a kind of audio platform that allowed for this whole kind of genre of rap music, or several different genres of rap music that these men like participate in or part of. And in that, they sort of create character versions of themselves, or embody, you know, these alter egos in a way that, you know, but they're them too. I mean, they have like the face tattoos, and they, you know, dye their hair, and they wear crazy clothes and piercings or what have you. That's who they are. But you know, for Marnie, like, she knew them when they were kids in high school with her, you know, and so in a way she's exploring who they've become, and what part of their lives is performance, and what part is, you know, like all the different aspects of performance, and like being performative and taking on these alter egos. So yeah, like how much are you, you know, even in the marketing of the film, or all these different aspects, like how much are you leaning into these personas that these men have created for themselves, or how much are you trying to protect the person you used to know, you know, when they were your friend? So it was a very challenging, you know, and to the earlier point, that film was shot in like 10 days. It was shot over 10 days and edited over 2+ years. So, I mean, that to the point of spending the time to really make sure that we're, you know, that the vision was fully realized, it needed that much time. And there was a lot of like hard decisions, and, you know, we only had X amount of scenes. So how many different ways can you like order them or present them, you know? So that's kind of what we mean by like time, money, quality, like giving the time to get to a level of quality in the work. And that film, you know, sadly, you know, kind of because of the pandemic, like didn't get to have its full life, but played a lot of great festivals, was released earlier this year, you know, the incredible soundtrack by Animal Collective, you know, like I'm really proud of that film, but it really started with just Marnie being like, I'm going to go to the desert with my friends and I'm going to shoot this stuff. And we're like, okay. And then, you know, so.
Yeah, and the result is incredibly powerful and poetic. But I'm keeping my eye on the time. And I do want to ask you a couple of questions about kind of the state of the industry these days. And yeah, you just mentioned the pandemic. So one of the reasons we're doing this talk on Zoom is, of course, the COVID-19. And I wonder if you might share some observation or thoughts with us about how do you see the future of theatrical distribution? Do you feel that you're producing film mostly for people who are going to watch them on small screens, iPhones, you know, mobile devices? Or do you still, when you talk to filmmakers, do you still talk in terms of, you know, this would be a great frame for the theatrical version and so on? And what are some of your thoughts about that?
Well, we could literally do hours just on that subject. I think I've spoken about it enough in enough meetings that I can get it down to the 8 minutes we have left. So basically, I think, you know, this last year showed us a world without theatrical distribution. And in a way, I think, you know, things are maybe different in the rest of the world because there's certain kind of legal protections and the industries work in different ways and their kind of governments get involved. But in North America, you know, a lot of theaters closed. And I think that theaters misunderstood their role in the distribution chain. They were sitting on their properties saying, our value is that you can only see certain movies through us. And that's not the value of theaters. The value of theaters is seeing them big, loud, and with a community. And I think a lot of the film owners who were just cynically sitting on that asset have walked away from the table. And so now there's all this opportunity for new players to come in and program theaters in a very competitive landscape. And I think the theaters that look at their competition as Netflix, as opposed to AMC, are better suited to get people to come out. You could play Indiana Jones in any theater in America and you will get at least 40 people to show up. Not because they don't know how it ends, but because they want to have that experience. And I think that, you know, if you talk about building theaters, not only to have a very dynamic relationship with their communities, but also being a place to premiere new films, a place to build a brand that means something. You could have theaters like Metrograph in New York is a great theater. That would mean something if a film premiered there and can be just as good as a Festival Laurel on your poster to signify, oh, they program good stuff. That means something. The same way that a memory logo can say, oh, that means something. So I think if you start to break the line between festivals, theaters, curators online, and just think of these curatorial brands as brands of influence, then you can really start to have, you know, you go from having 5 typewriters to 10,000 typewriters, and all of a sudden you can have very localized scenes where a filmmaker in Mississippi gets to premiere their film in a local theater, and that turns on 5 more people to make films in Mississippi. And all of a sudden you have like regional scenes that are creating new works. And then something can, you know, transcend from that scene and play in Nashville and play in New York and play in LA, play around the world, play in Tel Aviv. And you start to create a very rich film industry. At least that's my hope. And I think that what's the threat of that is that it's also allowed kind of these larger corporations to come and hoover up all the assets. But I think the thing is that they're only thinking about films that fit in a very kind of traditional 3-act, story-driven structure where everyone's looking at the screen in the same direction in the same way. But there is a broader spectrum of things that can exist. And I don't think we hold any particular bias against things that are maybe iPhone first or maybe web first, you know, that those are valuable experiences. And if you start thinking about films not as things on big screens to be mixed in 5:1, you actually start to not only reduce the cost of what it takes just to enter the field, but you actually start to talk about a medium that is maybe more vital for our time and more suited to audiences of our times, rather than kind of being carrying on the unchecked assumptions of what film has been for, 120 years. So I think there's a ton of opportunity. I think there's also a ton of peril, but I want to inspire people to make their own memories in a way. And by memories, I don't mean like, I mean companies that can go out and kind of mean something to their own communities, that can foster creative innovation within the moving picture medium, rather than just thinking about them as 90-minute films. Riel.
And I think this is also really useful in
okay.
Like just helping us kind of move away from the, you know, I have so many friends who are filmmakers, and sometimes it's really heartbreaking when they're like, oh, my film didn't get into Sundance, and there's a feeling that this is the end of the road. And it's like, right, this is it, probably no one's going to watch it, and I just spent 7 years on this project, and you know, and the festival circus is incredibly competitive. And it's just getting more and more and more competitive because more people out there are making fantastic, brilliant films. So it's actually really difficult. Even if you have a great project, it's difficult to squeeze it into one of the A-list festivals. So I think
we need to even challenge that assumption. You could play Sundance and not sell. That's where we are now. And you might get, you know, you might never get theatrical distribution, and you might never even really sell to a platform, even with an award at Sundance. That let alone make your money back. So that idea that it's all or nothing, you might win and still lose. So what are we playing? I just think there has to be more people need to be more comfortable living outside of what they grew up with. Like so many directors grew up with like the 90s of going like, well, my film is going to play theaters and I'm going to walk the red carpet. And it's like, well, if you want that, you got to make a very specific type of film. If you're following your creative energy to wherever you want to go, then I would suggest start looking for other avenues that can be an outlet for those, because the film industry is very narrow.
And do you want show? Do you want to add anything to that briefly?
I mean, the only thing I'll add is that someone who's worked with us for many years told me the greatest cinematic experience he had last year was watching a story play out in a video game on Twitch. And it's like a Grand Theft Auto like virtual world that people have created a storyline within it, and you can follow the different characters as they live out this storyline, and this storyline played out for a week. And he said that was the greatest story he'd seen in a year. So, you know, like the future is of cinema. I mean, it's always going to stay. There will always be films. There are always going to be that mode of films that Sebastian is speaking to. That's very narrow, but you know, I don't know if that's how young people are going to engage in stories or motion picture in the future. So I think it's being open for all of those things, and we're very open for that. You know, I don't think if we're not anti-story, I think we're anti-nostalgia. If we're anti-anything. I think we really want to see what the future has to hold, and we want to jump into people who are thinking about that, and not people who are screaming the house is on fire, and you know, like a lot of those power brokers, gatekeepers are panicking or what have you. And I want to work with people who want to innovate from those changes, not try and claw and hold on to making things the way they always were.
Change is opportunity.
Right. And I think I just want to we touched upon so many topics, and we can spend all day talking about the thing. I do want to end by asking you, is there any filmmaker or filmmakers that you are dying to work with? Anyone on your dream list that, or at least that you recommend other people go check their work, like they're doing really interesting things? Any non-memory filmmaker that you would like to adopt?
We don't work that way.
Yeah, that's tough. I spend so much of my time trying to advocate for the filmmakers we are working on. Like my entire day is like, you should work with or give us money for, or you should check out this filmmaker. And these are the filmmakers that we're supporting. So like people
I would say
Anger.
Yeah.
You know,
I would say Rommel Ross or Khalil Joseph. Those are ones that I've always really, really admired. Riel, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to list memory filmmakers, but you said not to do that.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, yeah, like people like Zia Anger, you know, we're working with Marnie on her new film. I think she's evolving and doing really incredible work. You know, there's a lot of, yeah, I don't know, like Sierra Pattengale is, you know, her films. There's a lot of films that I'm really excited to see that people I know are working on that are going to come out soon. And I think that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, I love how very much like proud parents, when I ask you to name the kids in the kindergarten that you really like, you're like, our kids, we're like, our kids. It makes perfect sense. And this, yeah, absolutely. And your kids are beautiful and brilliant. I think we should all go and watch All Light Everywhere this weekend. It's still streaming on the Docaviv platform, so you can watch it there. And follow Memory. I mean, follow the website and your next project. So I'm really, really excited to keep following your filmmakers. And thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I really appreciate that.
Of course, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in for that. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.